Cop saves woman from armed gang, discovers her son is a powerful congressman. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The streets of Brookside had a rhythm of their own at night, soft, subdued, and predictable. Streetlights flickered along Franklin Avenue, casting long, golden reflections over rain-slicked pavement. Small bungalows lined either side, their porches quiet, curtains drawn tight. To most, it was an ordinary Tuesday slipping into Wednesday. To Officer James Carter, it was another stretch of hours spent ensuring it stayed that way. He sat behind the wheel of his patrol cruiser, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other cradling the radio clipped to his shoulder. His voice, calm and unhurried, broke the stillness. Unit 4-2. Clear on perimeter sweep. No activity. Moving eastbound on Franklin. The dispatcher's response crackled back, routine and measured. Copy that, 4-2. Continue your route. James released the button and settled back into his seat, eyes scanning the sidewalks methodically. He knew these streets like the back of his hand. Every pothole, every leaning lamppost, every porch swing that creaked too much in the wind. For most, patrol at this hour meant monotony. For James, it meant vigilance. His uniform sat crisp against his broad frame, his badge gleaming faintly beneath the soft interior light. His mind remained sharp, anchored by the unspoken truth that calm could shatter without warning. A cat darted across the street a few yards ahead, vanishing under a parked sedan. James slowed the cruiser instinctively, eyes narrowing. Habit more than suspicion. His gaze flicked to the rearview mirror and back ahead. Nothing stirred. He rounded the next corner onto Pine Street, tires humming softly over the asphalt. The alleyways along this stretch always felt different. Narrower, boxed in by buildings that leaned too close together, graffiti winding like veins across brick facades. His headlights swept across overflowing trash bins, pallets stacked against chain-link fences, and shattered glass catching glints like scattered stars. Then it came, a sound no patrol officer could ignore. A scream. Thin, sharp, and laced with desperation. James's fingers clenched around the wheel. He tapped the brakes gently, easing the cruiser to a smooth stop along the curb. His heartbeat quickened, not from fear but from pure focus sharpening like a blade. His hand moved without thought, unclipping the seatbelt, reaching for his flashlight on the passenger seat, fingers brushing the grip of his sidearm to confirm its presence. He pressed the radio to his shoulder again, voice clipped. Unit 4-2. Possible 10-16, Pine Alley. Investigating. Stand by. The dispatcher's acknowledgement faded as James pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. The smell of damp concrete and engine oil lingered faintly. He shut the cruiser door gently, mindful not to slam it, and advanced toward the alley's mouth with controlled strides. The scream rang out again. Closer now, raw and panicked. A woman's voice, pleading. James lifted his flashlight, thumb clicking it on. The beam cut through the murk ahead, illuminating the tight corridor framed by brick walls and rusted fire escapes. His boots made soft contact against the cracked pavement, his steps fluid and steady. Every sense tuned in, distant tires against asphalt, the faint buzz of a transformer, his own measured breathing. His eyes sharpened as the alley deepened. Shadows melted away under the flashlight's glare, revealing scuffed dumpsters, scattered cardboard boxes, and crumpled beer cans. The air felt heavier here, close and sour. His grip on the flashlight remained firm, angled just beneath the barrel of his holstered sidearm. 50 feet in, he caught movement. Fast, abrupt, a blur of motion behind an overflowing bin. James halted immediately, weight balanced evenly between both feet, body angled for tactical readiness. His shoulders squared, flashlight beam fixed forward unwaveringly. The cries became clearer. Choked sobs now, fragmented words tangled in fear. Please, no, please don't. James's jaw set firmly. His breath deepened through his nose, slow and deliberate to steady, adrenaline threatening to surge. His mind dissected the layout ahead in seconds, cover points, lines of sight, and most importantly, exits. Standard training lived in his muscles now, automatic and precise. He advanced again, quicker but quiet, boots rolling heel to toe to muffle sound. His flashlight swept right, then left, brick walls closing tighter, the alley funneling toward a dead end. His pulse stayed even as the scene unfolded before him fully. An elderly woman stood pinned between two towering dumpsters. Her back hunched, hands outstretched defensively. Strands of gray hair clung to her tear-streaked face and her thin cardigan sagged from her shoulders. 3 figures loomed around her, silhouettes cast sharp and angular by his light. James halted in place, setting his feet solidly. His voice echoed through the alley, commanding and ironclad. "Police! Step away from her. Drop anything you're holding." The gang members froze, heads snapping toward him simultaneously. Their outlines hardened under the beam, one wielding a knife glinting silver, another clutching the strap of a duffel bag, and the third shifting his stance warily. For the first time that night, the veneer of calm shattered completely. James raised his free hand swiftly, unsnapping the holster at his side. His service weapon rose fluidly into a two-handed grip angled squarely at center mass. His posture spoke volumes, unwavering, unyielding. "I won't ask again. Step away." The leader of the group sneered, lips curling into something cold and defiant. His companions shifted their weight subtly, glances darting between each other. Calculations flickered in their eyes, fight or flee. James didn't blink. His breath remained slow and measured, his aim dead steady. His flashlight beam split the darkness, cutting across their torsos and illuminating every twitch and flicker of movement. The woman whimpered softly, shrinking closer to the dumpster. Her voice, hoarse and fragile, barely carried. "Help me." James didn't shift his focus, but his jaw clenched harder. His voice deepened, finality anchoring every syllable. "Brookside PD. You've got one shot to do the right thing." The night had snapped awake. What was routine had morphed into something far more volatile. Officer James Carter stood alone, weapon raised, courage locked in place, facing 3 armed strangers in a shadowed alley. And he didn't plan on backing down. James Carter's voice still echoed faintly off the brick walls as the command settled over the narrow alley. His stance held, legs planted firmly, arms locked in perfect control, service weapon fixed on the gang clustered around the woman. His flashlight cast sharp angles across their faces, exposing gaunt cheeks, shifting eyes, and twitching fingers. None of them stepped back. The woman trembled uncontrollably, her back pressed hard against the rusted dumpster behind her. Knuckles white, she clutched her handbag as if letting go might mean losing far more than leather and contents. Her lips moved without sound now, a silent mantra of fear. The 3 men surrounding her shifted uneasily. The leader, a tall, lean figure in a dark hoodie, stood at the center, knife still poised casually in his right hand. His eyes locked on James, hard and unflinching, as though calculating the odds in real time. To his left, a younger man, wiry and restless, rolled the strap of a duffel bag in his palm. The third, broader, face shadowed by a baseball cap, took a small step to the right, gaze flickering toward an exit route down the alley's far end. James caught every motion, every tick. His mind logged it fast and clean. 3 suspects. 1 visibly armed. Possible firearm based on bulge under hoodie of third man. Victim cornered, limited egress. His voice cut through the standoff again, sharp and commanding. "Last warning. Drop your weapons. Hands where I can see them." No one complied. The leader's smirk widened fractionally. He tilted his head, speaking low to his companions without taking his gaze off James. "Cops think 1 badge makes them bulletproof." The younger man on the left shifted his feet, adrenaline flashing across his face. His hand twitched toward his waistband. James adjusted his aim imperceptibly, eyes narrowing. He didn't want to shoot, but hesitation could be fatal. A split second later, movement exploded from the third man. His hand darted under his hoodie, drawing out a compact pistol. Without hesitation, James squeezed his trigger. The gunshot cracked sharply, reverberating through the enclosed space. His round struck a rusted metal panel behind the suspect, deliberately wide of center mass, a controlled warning. The effect was immediate. The gunman flinched hard, stumbled sideways, and dropped his weapon to the concrete with a clatter. The younger man froze in place, eyes wide. The leader's expression hardened. He lunged toward the woman, knife flashing downward. James surged forward. His boots struck pavement in 3 fast strides. His left arm swung up instinctively, knocking the leader's wrist wide. The blade scraped sparks off the dumpster and clattered from his grip. James pivoted sharply, shoulders slamming into the gang leader's chest, driving him backwards. They collided with the opposite wall with a heavy thud. Before James could pin him down fully, the younger man sprang forward. The duffel bag swung upward like a crude bludgeon. James ducked low, rolling to his left and rising into a crouch just as the bag skimmed over his head. With practiced precision, he swept his leg outward, catching the younger man's ankle. The attacker toppled sideways, landing hard on cracked asphalt. The gang leader, recovered faster than expected, swung a clenched fist toward James's temple. James blocked with his forearm, countered with an elbow drive to the gut, and twisted his body to keep between both assailants and the terrified woman. His weapon remained secured in his grip, angled safely downward as close-quarters combat surged around him. The downed gunman scrambled toward his dropped pistol. James's eyes snapped to the movement. With no time to spare, he dropped his weight forward, tackling the man to the ground. His knee pinned the suspect's wrist. His free hand wrenched the firearm away, sliding it far out of reach. The woman's cries grew louder, fractured, and raw behind him. James gritted his teeth, adrenaline coursing hot through every nerve. He couldn't afford distraction. The younger man recovered quickly, charging from behind with the duffel again. James spun sideways, lifting his arm to block the strike. The impact jarred through his forearm but didn't break his stance. He retaliated swiftly, driving his fist square into the man's sternum. The younger attacker staggered backwards, gasping for breath. A high-pitched siren wailed faintly in the distance. Then another, closer, building fast. Backup was en route. James didn't relax. He couldn't. The fight hadn't left the gang yet. The leader lunged once more, fists swinging wildly. James absorbed the first hit to his shoulder, sidestepped, and caught the man in a headlock, wrenching him off balance. The suspect struggled, feet slipping against oil-slick concrete, but James tightened the hold expertly, lowering them both to the ground with controlled force. The younger man, winded but persistent, staggered to his feet and reached for the fallen pistol. James reacted instantly. He released the headlock, kicked the firearm farther across the alley, and rose fluidly, gun now aimed squarely between the man's shoulder blades. "Don't." The simple word, crisp and unyielding, froze the man mid-motion. Chest heaving, hands twitching, the fight drained visibly from his posture. James spared a quick glance at the woman. She huddled against the dumpster, knees drawn close, eyes locked on him with something between terror and fragile hope. He gave the smallest nod, reassurance conveyed silently before returning his full attention to the suspects. Red and blue strobes splashed against the brick walls seconds later. Two cruisers screeched to a halt at the alley's mouth. Doors flung open and uniformed officers poured in, weapons drawn, commands shouted over the scene. Brookside PD. Hands in the air. On the ground now. James straightened, breath heavy but steady, stepping back from the subdued suspects as backup surged around him. His grip loosened slightly on his weapon as his fellow officers secured the area. Handcuffs clicked. Shouts softened to clear instructions. One officer knelt beside the woman, speaking gently as she broke into sobs of relief. James holstered his sidearm slowly, exhaling long and deep. His heartbeat still thudded hard behind his ribs, but the tension began to unspool from his shoulders. He met the gaze of one of the arriving officers, a nod exchanged, respect clear. The alley was no longer a battleground. The immediate danger had passed. But James knew without his decisive action, the outcome might have been very different. He stepped aside, allowing paramedics to reach the woman as officers led the subdued suspects toward waiting cruisers. His focus lingered on her for a moment longer, her fragile figure, her trembling hands. Relief washed over her face as her eyes found his. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." James simply dipped his head once, sharp and sure. No words needed. He had done what he came to do. The air in the alley shifted the moment the handcuffs locked and the final suspect was escorted away. Tension, thick and electric moments ago, began to dissolve into something quieter but no less heavy. The flashing lights painted long shadows, bathing brick walls and glistening asphalt in harsh reds and blues. Shouts dulled to routine radio chatter and clipped orders exchanged between officers. James Carter stood in the center of it all, breath-steadying, boots planted firmly on cracked pavement. His eyes scanned the scene once more, not out of habit now, but to confirm what instinct had already told him. The immediate threat was gone. His weapon remained holstered, his hands finally at ease at his sides. Near the dumpster, the woman sat slumped against the cold metal. Her shoulders trembled, shallow breaths rattling through parted lips. Strands of silver-gray hair clung damply to her face. Though safe now, she clutched her handbag as though the danger might still return if she loosened her grip. James approached carefully, movements deliberate. He crouched beside her, lowering himself to eye level. His voice dropped low, steady and sure, cutting through the fog of sirens and murmurs. "You're safe now, ma'am. It's over." Her eyes lifted to meet his, wide and glassy with shock. For a long second she didn't speak, lips parting but no words emerging. Instead, tears brimmed, slipping down weathered cheeks and catching in the deep lines at the corners of her mouth. One of the paramedics knelt nearby, setting a first aid bag on the ground and glancing toward James for silent permission to approach. He gave a brief nod, stepping slightly to the side but not away. His presence remained close, anchored. As the paramedic gently checked the woman for injuries, James spoke again, softer this time. "Can you tell me your name?" Her hand, still clenched around the handbag, loosened at last. She blinked hard, swallowing thickly. "Margaret," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the single word, worn raw from fear and strain. James gave her a faint smile, warm and grounding. "Nice to meet you, Margaret. I'm Officer Carter. You're going to be okay." She nodded weakly, breath hitching. Her gaze drifted toward the retreating silhouettes of officers leading her attackers away. Fresh emotion welled up and broke loose, tears spilling faster now. Her lips quivered as she turned back toward James. "Thank you," she rasped. You saved my life." Her fingers trembled as they reached out, brushing the sleeve of his uniform as if needing to confirm he was real. He caught her hand gently, his grip firm and reassuring but without weight. "I just did what anyone would do," James replied evenly, though the sincerity in his eyes deepened the simple words. There was no boast, no theatrics. It wasn't false modesty, it was his truth. In his mind, he had done what the badge required of him. Nothing more. The paramedic glanced up. "No physical injuries, but she's in shock. We'll get her checked out at the hospital." His partner arrived with a stretcher, wheels rattling softly over the uneven ground. Margaret's grip tightened momentarily as she noticed the stretcher approaching. Her shoulders stiffened, fresh panic flared in her eyes. James leaned in slightly, lowering his voice again. "They're just here to make sure you're okay, Margaret. You'll be in good hands." She looked at him for confirmation, finding something calm and steady in his gaze. Gradually, the fight left her posture. When the paramedics carefully guided her to her feet, she allowed it, though her hand never fully left James's. As they wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and gently guided her toward the waiting ambulance, Margaret's fingers lingered against James's gloved hand. He rose fluidly, walking alongside them for a few steps, ensuring she stayed steady. Before stepping into the ambulance, she paused, glancing back at him once more. The expression on her face, something between awe and disbelief, held a quiet depth words couldn't reach. The streetlights caught in her tear-streaked cheeks, reflecting a faint shimmer. She squeezed his hand weakly one final time. "You don't know what you've done for me," she said, her voice stronger now but heavy with emotion. Her gaze lingered as if committing his face to memory. James gave a small nod. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he answered, the same quiet humility unwavering. As the paramedics helped her into the ambulance, she released his hand at last. The doors shut gently behind her. The red lights rotated across James's face as the engine rumbled to life. He stood motionless for a moment, letting the hum of the scene fill his awareness, the murmur of officers securing reports, the static pop of radios, the distant crackle of dispatch confirming the arrests. The hard edge of adrenaline had softened now, but in its place remained the sharp clarity of what had been at stake. Another officer approached, clipboard in hand, ready to collect his statement. James glanced once toward the departing ambulance before turning back, expression neutral, shoulders squaring. The task ahead remained clear. Tonight, Margaret would go home. Safe. Breathing. Alive. And for James Carter, that was enough. By the time Officer James Carter stepped through the precinct doors that morning, a thin layer of fatigue clung to him like an old jacket. His shift had ended hours earlier, but sleep had been elusive. Flashes of the previous night, the alley, the gang, Margaret's trembling hands lingered in the corners of his mind. Even now, as fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead and the familiar aroma of stale coffee drifted from the break room, his body moved on autopilot. He crossed the tiled floor with measured steps, nodding politely to fellow officers sorting through paperwork and debriefings. Nothing about the station seemed different. The same scuffed floors, the same cluttered bulletin boards. Just another day. Then his captain's voice cut across the chatter, sharp but neutral. "Carter. My office. Now." James blinked, straightened instinctively, and changed course. His boots echoed faintly as he approached the closed door. 1,000 mundane reasons for a summons passed through his mind, none of them alarming. His hand met the doorknob, cool and solid beneath his palm, and with a quiet breath he turned it and stepped inside. The room wasn't empty. Across from the captain's desk stood a man in a tailored navy suit, shoulders squared, presence commanding without saying a word. A discreet earpiece coiled behind one ear. To his left and right, 2 plainclothes security agents hovered with practiced vigilance. Though their eyes scanned everything with clinical efficiency, it was clear neither of them was the centerpiece here. The man in the suit turned as James entered, revealing a face familiar from countless campaign posters and television interviews, U.S. Congressman Daniel Whitaker. His expression, however, bore none of the polished detachment so common among politicians. His features were softened by something deeper, his usually composed demeanor edged with something raw. For a brief second, James faltered. His mind searched for context but found none. His uniform felt heavier under the congressman's gaze. Whitaker stepped forward without hesitation, extending a hand firmly. "Officer Carter," he said, voice thick with unspent emotion. "I'm Daniel Whitaker. You saved my mother's life." The words landed heavily, stripping the room of any pretense. The formalities dissolved instantly. James met his handshake with a steady grip, brow furrowing as understanding dawned. "Margaret." His throat tightened involuntarily, but he held Whitaker's gaze. "I didn't know she was—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without diminishing the moment. "You didn't need to," Whitaker interrupted gently. His hand squeezed James's once before letting go. "That's what matters. You didn't ask who she was. You didn't hesitate. You acted because it was right." There was no grandstanding in his tone, no polished speech, just plain, unvarnished gratitude. James shifted his weight slightly, shoulders loosening. He wasn't accustomed to praise, much less from men whose decisions rippled across the country. His instinct, as always, was to deflect. "I was doing my job, sir," he said quietly, his voice even but not dismissive. Whitaker gave a faint smile. Not the rehearsed politician's smile, but something worn and genuine. Plenty of people wear a badge. Not all of them have the courage to run toward danger when they don't know the stakes. The congressman's eyes darkened slightly, hints of the previous night surfacing in his memory. "My mother told me what happened, how you shielded her, how you stood your ground against 3 armed men. You gave her back to me." His jaw set briefly as if steadying his emotions. "There's no greater debt I can owe." James didn't respond immediately. Words seemed insufficient, unnecessary even. He simply nodded, the weight of what had transpired settling anew on his shoulders. Whitaker's posture straightened subtly, the practiced efficiency of a statesman returning. "I didn't come here just to thank you in private, Officer Carter. The country needs to hear this story, not because of who my mother is, but because of who you are, what you represent." James's brow furrowed slightly. "Sir." The congressman's expression sharpened with conviction. "Too often we hear about failures, about corruption, about what goes wrong. People forget there are men like you out there doing what's right without expectation of recognition." His gaze locked on James, unwavering. "I intend to make sure they know. I want your story told. Publicly. You deserve that." Silence hung for a beat. James exhaled slowly, his jaw flexing once. He wasn't a man drawn to spotlight or headlines. His work spoke for itself, and he had always been content with that. Yet something in Whitaker's words carried a weight larger than personal pride. A chance to remind people why the badge mattered, why integrity mattered. "I'm not comfortable being called a hero," James said finally, his tone calm but honest. Whitaker nodded knowingly. Real heroes rarely are. Behind them, the captain cleared his throat softly, signaling quiet approval without disrupting the exchange. The congressman extended his hand once more, and this time James grasped it without hesitation. "Whatever comes of this," Whitaker said, voice lower, "know that you have my gratitude and my respect. My office will be in touch to arrange interviews and commendations only if you're willing." James's gaze held steady. His mind sifted through the implications but landed on one truth: the act itself had been uncalculated, driven by instinct and duty. If the story's telling could uphold those values, perhaps it was worth sharing. "I'll cooperate," he answered simply. Whitaker's shoulders eased. The faintest hint of relief softened the corners of his eyes. Good. The country could use a reminder of what quiet bravery looks like. With that, the congressman signaled subtly to his security team. They pivoted smoothly toward the door, clearing the way. Before exiting, Whitaker turned one last time. "My mother sends her thanks. Personally." His voice dropped slightly, almost conspiratorial. "She says you're a good man, Officer Carter." James's lips lifted into the smallest of smiles, understated but sincere. "Tell her I'm glad she's safe." Whitaker nodded, then stepped into the corridor, the quiet click of the door closing behind him leaving the office still once again. James stood in the lingering quiet for a moment, breath slow, gaze steady. The day had just begun, but already it carried the weight of something far beyond routine. He squared his shoulders, ready for what would come next. By mid-morning, long before Officer James Carter had fully processed the visit from Congressman Whitaker, the first headlines were already circulating. What began as a local incident spiraled outward like ripples on water. Local news stations broke the story, their anchors recounting the narrow alleyway, the armed confrontation, and the quiet officer who intervened. Within hours, national networks seized on it. Footage surfaced swiftly. Carter's body cam captured snippets of the confrontation. The sharp commands, the blur of movement, the decisive action that turned the tide. Dash cam angles painted a broader canvas, flashing lights against brick walls, shadows scattering into darkness. Eyewitnesses came forward eagerly, their voices charged with admiration. "He didn't hesitate," one man told a reporter. "He stepped in before anyone else could even move." But it wasn't the raw footage or the first-hand accounts alone that propelled the narrative into something larger. It was the twist that no one could resist. The woman he had shielded wasn't just anyone. She was Margaret Whitaker, mother of one of the most powerful lawmakers in the country. The headline practically wrote itself: "Cop risks life to save woman, unaware she's a congressman's mother." Cable news ran loops of the footage, their graphics bold and relentless. Talk show panels dissected every frame. Social media platforms ignited. The story threaded its way through trending hashtags and viral posts, crossing from news into public consciousness almost instantly. Comments poured in from across the country. Strangers, many of whom had never so much as spoken to a police officer, filled timelines with words like hero, courage, and integrity. Carter's name trended within the day. Journalists descended on the precinct, cameras and microphones in tow. At first, the station's front desk tried to deflect the wave, but it became clear resistance was futile. Requests poured in for interviews, morning shows, evening news, human interest segments. James Carter found himself sitting under studio lights for the first time in his life. The contrast was stark. On patrol, he was a quiet, steady figure, deliberate and focused. Under the glare of broadcast cameras, his posture remained composed, though the artificial polish of studios felt foreign to him. Interviewers angled for sound bites, but Carter's answers were spare and consistent. "I did what any officer should do," he repeated with measured calm. "I didn't know who she was. That didn't matter to me. I was just doing my job." Producers prodded gently, trying to draw out personal anecdotes or dramatic embellishments, but Carter declined each opportunity to glorify the moment. His even tone and steady gaze were unshakable, and somehow, that authenticity only fueled public admiration further. Viewers weren't seeing an officer chasing recognition. They saw a man who had acted because it was right, not because anyone was watching. On the streets, the response was palpable. People he'd passed countless times on patrol now approached him with warm nods and firm handshakes. Some simply said, "Thank you." Others clasped his shoulder wordlessly. Once, a young boy handed him a crayon-drawn picture of a police badge surrounded by stars, his mother smiling softly behind him. Carter accepted each gesture with the same quiet humility. His world, once centered on a handful of city blocks and a steady patrol route, had expanded almost overnight. Yet he navigated it with the same clear-eyed steadiness he brought to every shift. His fellow officers noticed the shift too. A subtle current of pride pulsed through the precinct. The badge, long weighed down by skepticism and scrutiny, gleamed a little brighter in the public eye, even if only for a while. Carter never claimed to speak for all officers, but by living the values they aspired to, he had unintentionally become a symbol larger than himself. Congressman Whitaker made good on his word. He spoke publicly on multiple platforms, reiterating the facts. Carter hadn't known Margaret's identity. He hadn't stopped to weigh the risks or the optics. He had simply acted. He didn't ask who she was, Whitaker said in an address broadcast nationally. He didn't hesitate. He protected someone vulnerable because that is what integrity demands. That's what service means. And we are all better for it. For Carter, the swirl of attention never sat quite comfortably. The spotlight seemed to follow him into every corner of his life, yet it never changed his routine. He rose early. He reported to duty on time. His patrol remained thorough and uneventful, just as he preferred. When journalists asked whether he had ambitions for promotion, a political career, or book deals, all suggestions floated eagerly by media outlets. He smiled politely and demurred. "I became a cop to serve my community," he told them. That hasn't changed. He didn't romanticize the job. He knew its challenges and complexities better than most. But his straightforwardness disarmed even the most seasoned reporters. Where others might have leveraged a moment of fame, Carter simply carried on. He did agree to one televised interview where Margaret Whitaker herself sat beside him. She recounted the alleyway with a steady voice, her hand brushing his forearm gratefully as she spoke. Her words resonated deeply with viewers across the nation. "I thought I was going to die that night, and then I saw him, this man standing between me and danger without a second thought. I will never forget what he did." The clip circulated widely. For many, it humanized a story that had already captured their hearts. In quieter moments, away from cameras and accolades, Carter often found himself reflecting not on the headlines, but on Margaret's voice in that alley and the adrenaline-fueled clarity that had guided his actions. He didn't see heroism in it, only responsibility fulfilled. And so, even as articles appeared in national magazines and documentary crews inquired about long-form interviews, Carter's stance didn't waver. He returned to his patrol route, radio crackling softly at his shoulder, eyes scanning familiar streets. If recognition came, he accepted it with a nod. If strangers stopped to shake his hand, he listened graciously and moved on. Because long after the headlines faded and the news cycle spun forward, Officer James Carter knew one simple truth. Courage wasn't meant for cameras. It belonged in quiet alleys, when no one was watching, when it mattered most. The knock at the door was firm but unhurried. James Carter set his coffee down, rising from the worn kitchen chair. His small home, neat and unpretentious, sat quietly on a tree-lined street where life moved at a measured pace. Opening the door, Carter wasn't surprised to see Congressman Daniel Whitaker standing there, hands tucked into the pockets of a crisp gray overcoat. "Mind if I come in?" Whitaker asked, his voice softened by something beyond formality. Carter stepped aside, motioning toward the porch instead. The morning air was cool and clean, touched with the scent of distant rain. They settled into wooden chairs facing the quiet street, each with a mug cradled in hand. No cameras. No reporters, just two men who had crossed paths under extraordinary circumstances. For a few moments, they sat in companionable silence, the kind that settles easily between people who understand the weight of what has passed. "I thought it was important," Whitaker finally began, "to thank you away from microphones and headlines, just man to man." Carter nodded, gaze steady. He hadn't expected the visit, but neither did it surprise him. The congressman had a certain deliberateness in everything he did. Whitaker sipped his coffee, then glanced toward the horizon. "You know, my mother's a tough woman. Grew up during harder times than most can imagine now. Raised me on her own after my father died. Worked 2 jobs. Kept food on the table and a roof over our heads without ever letting me feel like we were short on anything that mattered." There was no embellishment in his tone, just quiet recollection. "She always told me," Whitaker continued, "it doesn't matter who's watching. You do right because it's right." And that night, well, you reminded me of her words. Carter listened without interruption, fingers curling lightly around the ceramic mug's warmth. He didn't need to speak to know what those memories meant. Whitaker's eyes lingered on the distant street where children's bicycles lay tipped over in front yards. His expression shifted from nostalgia to something firmer. I've worked around law enforcement most of my career. Protection details, federal agencies, you name it. You have the kind of temperament and skill they look for. The kind of backbone people count on when stakes are high. He turned fully to Carter now, his gaze intent. There are opportunities, James. Positions in federal protective services. Leadership roles. You'd make an impact on a larger scale. I can help open those doors. The words hung there, an offer wrapped in respect rather than ambition. Carter weighed them carefully, his mind tracing the familiar lines of his neighborhood. The streets he'd walked, the lives he'd touched quietly over years of steady service. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set the cup on the porch rail and leaned back, gaze lifting to the soft sway of branches overhead. Birds flitted between them, undisturbed by the gravity of the conversation unfolding below. When he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. I appreciate that, sir. More than I can say. But I'm where I need to be. There was no hesitation, no need to elaborate. His world didn't revolve around titles or broader jurisdictions. His purpose was rooted right here. On these streets, among these people. Whitaker absorbed the answer with a slow nod, no trace of disappointment shadowing his features. Instead, a smile touched the corners of his mouth, quiet and approving. Men like you remind me why I do what I do, he said simply. They talked on, their conversation meandering through lighter subjects. Stories of long shifts, community quirks, and shared reflections on service. Whitaker spoke of legislative battles, of the delicate balance between power and responsibility. Carter countered with tales from patrol, small acts of kindness, the subtle threads that wove a community together. As the morning stretched on, neither man seemed eager to break the moment. The world beyond their quiet street, buzzing news cycles, political agendas, and public accolades, felt distant here. What mattered was simpler, clearer. Eventually, Whitaker rose, brushing imaginary dust from his coat sleeves. He extended a hand, grip firm and steady. Thank you again, James. Not just for what you did for my mother, but for who you are every day. Carter accepted the handshake without ceremony. It was my duty, nothing more. But both men knew better. Duty had carried Carter into that alley. Character had kept him there even when danger escalated. Whitaker's security detail waited discreetly by the curb, their presence unobtrusive but constant. He descended the porch steps, pausing once at the sidewalk to glance back. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding solidifying between them. When the congressman's car disappeared from view, Carter returned to his chair, coffee now lukewarm but forgotten. The porch creaked gently beneath him as he sat in quiet reflection. He wasn't one to dwell on recognition or influence. His satisfaction came from the steady pulse of ordinary life and the knowledge that, when called, he'd answered with everything he had. No fanfare. No expectations. Later that day, as the sky shifted to muted gray and neighbors began their evening routines, Carter laced his boots and clipped his badge into place. His shift awaited, familiar and unassuming. He locked the front door and stepped into the street where porch lights flickered on one by one. Whatever ripples the story had created, whatever reverberations might follow, his role remained clear. And that was enough. Seasons turned as they always do, with little regard for the stories they leave behind. But not everything faded with time. James Carter's actions that night, carved quietly into the fabric of his city, stirred something deeper than headlines and fleeting applause. The alley, once cloaked in shadow and silence, had transformed. What was once a forgotten stretch between aging brick buildings now hummed with life. The cracked pavement was resurfaced, lined with mural-painted walls that told stories of resilience and hope. Where gang insignias once sprawled, bold colors and images of community strength took their place. Near the alley's entrance stood a modest plaque fixed onto polished stone. Its inscription was simple: to those who act without knowing who they serve, true courage knows no audience. A few feet from that marker, the doors of the James Carter Youth Center swung open each morning. Funded by a congressional grant championed by Congressman Whitaker himself, the center stood as both a refuge and a launching pad. Children and teenagers filled the bright rooms, drawn by mentorship programs, workshops, and sports leagues. Here, the lessons weren't preached, they were lived. Marcus, a boy who had once flirted with the edges of street life, now led a photography class, capturing moments of his neighborhood's quiet beauty. Sarah, whose brother had been lost to gang violence, tutored younger students in math, offering the same patience and guidance she once craved. These were the ripples of Carter's decision, actions shaping futures in ways statistics could never measure. Though Carter had declined larger roles and grander titles, his name had become synonymous with integrity. Yet, in his modest way, he rarely visited the center named after him. He preferred the streets, the heartbeat of the community where his duty had always felt clearest. It was on one such evening, under a sky washed in the dim blush of sunset, that Carter's cruiser rolled steadily along the familiar route. His window was down, the cool breeze threading through the cabin. The same neighborhoods stretched out before him, but they felt subtly different. Safer, warmer. Echoes of that turbulent night had settled into something lasting. As he approached the alley, his eyes lingered on the changes. He slowed, letting the cruiser idle by the curb. A small group of teens clustered near the plaque, their voices light and easy. One of them, barely 16, pointed toward the inscription, explaining its meaning to a younger sibling. His words carried an unpolished reverence, as if retelling a legend that belonged to them all. Carter didn't step out or call attention to himself. He didn't need to. The scene unfolding spoke louder than any ceremony could. His radio crackled, dispatch calling units to a minor incident a few blocks away. Routine, nothing urgent. Carter acknowledged the call, easing the cruiser back into motion. His gaze flicked once more toward the alley as he passed. He didn't smile, didn't outwardly react, but something settled within him, a quiet confirmation that the work mattered even when no one noticed. Up ahead, porch lights blinked on as families gathered for dinner. A father hoisted his son onto his shoulders, an elderly woman swept her stoop, pausing to wave as Carter drove by. These small interactions stitched the neighborhood together in ways policies never could. Congressman Whitaker still sent occasional updates. Grants awarded. Programs expanded. Letters of thanks filtered through the precinct, some from as far as other states, inspired by the ripple effect of Carter's night of courage. Carter acknowledged them politely, always with the same steady response. Just doing what's needed. He hadn't changed his routine. Early mornings, late nights, familiar faces. His uniform wore comfortably now, less a symbol and more an extension of the man. He moved with quiet assurance, eyes sharp but calm. Not searching for recognition, just staying ready. At the next corner, he noticed a boy helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries inside. A simple act unnoticed by most, but Carter caught it. His nod, barely perceptible, marked it. These were the things that mattered most, the unseen threads holding a community upright. Later, as the sky deepened into night and streetlights blinked on, Carter parked the cruiser outside a small diner. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, greeted him with a nod and poured a cup of coffee before Carter had even asked. The rhythms of the neighborhood were as familiar as breath. He sat at the counter, steam curling from the cup, and let the quiet wrap around him. Conversations hummed gently in the background, plans, laughter, routine worries. Nothing sensational, nothing headline-worthy. Yet all of it anchored by the understanding that people were safe here. Safer than they'd been. Because once, on a night much like this, one man had stepped into an alley without weighing the odds or measuring the worth of the person he was protecting. Carter glanced out the window, watching as two patrol cars cruised past, their lights dim but present. His shift would continue soon, as it always had, as it always would. He didn't need monuments or ceremonies to remind him why he served. The streets, the faces, the small acts of courage and kindness all around him. That was legacy enough. As he rose to leave, Mr. Alvarez gave a knowing look. "Be safe out there, James." Carter's answer was simple, steady. "Always." He stepped into the night, the weight of his badge resting easily at his side. The alley, the plaque, the center, they would stand long after shifts ended. But for now, his place remained where it had always been, watching, ready, steady. No matter who needed him. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you are watching from and drop your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Officer James Carter's bravery and how he risked everything to save Margaret? How did you feel when Congressman Daniel Whitaker showed his gratitude and honored Carter's courage? We'd love to hear your reflections on their powerful journey. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us of the strength of kindness, duty, and selfless heroism. Thank you for watching.